What's good, everyone? I'm Zayas, and today I'm reviewing Mashle, Muscles, and Magic by Hajime Komodo. This is Hajime's first big serialization, which just so happens to be in Shonen Jump, which is quite impressive, especially considering that the series managed to continue on for over 150 chapters. Sadly, the series is a little bit of a disappointment. I've been following it since beginning, and I really wanted to like it, but it never really manages to come into its own. Mashal did have a lot going for it, and it started off on the right foot with a lot of lighthearted comedy, which was largely inspired by series like One Punch Man. Komodo has said that he really likes the web version of One Punch Man, which I do too. It's my preferred version of the series, and he even has a picture of Mob from Mob Psycho as his little illustration in Shonen Jump. The comedy is easily this series' biggest strength. It doesn't come close to how funny One Punch Man was, of course, because it's a lot less varied in the types of jokes it tells, and also it tries really hard to be a standard shonen manga, way harder than One Punch Man was, but the series can still be pretty funny nonetheless. Jokes about cream puffs, jokes about how insanely strong Mash was, to the point where he'd be batting away these magical swords with other magical swords, and even just jokes about how dumb Mash can be at times. I found them all pretty funny at first. They got really overused towards the end of this series to the point where it wasn't funny at all anymore. They also overused these deadpan faces, obviously a reference to Saitama's iconic deadpan face, but these characters will have faces like this everywhere, which again is funny until it's not. The positive behind all this is that although the jokes did get passed around quite a bit, it never got to the point where it actively detracted from my enjoyment of the series. I was just kind of like, okay, whatever, let's move on. The series was pretty funny towards the start of the series, and at the very end of the series, there was a big gap in there where it wasn't really that funny, sadly, but it picked back up at the end. We got great scenes like Baby Mash doing carpentry, we got Mash doing creatine in the middle of a fight, Mash being afraid that he murdered somebody, and also the Continental Kickboard just to end things off. The start of the series made a lot more jokes about Mash just being insanely powerful physically while everybody else uses magic, and I have a soft spot for series like this which are about working out. The obliviousness of Mash is what makes the series funny. The problem with Mashal though is that although the comedy is solid, it's just that solid, nothing spectacular, and in other areas the series gets a lot worse. The character designs in this series were lackluster at best. They're not the worst character designs, but it's pretty rare that you'll see a character which is memorable visually. The only three designs I can say that I liked are Mash himself. There was that one sound guy that he fought in this tournament arc, and by far the best design in the series, Doom. Well, Doom was good until he transformed. Characters blended in together, and it had a lot to do with the clothing these characters wore, which was all the same, alongside with their body types being very similar. I did like the lines on the face, but in a series like this, your characters really have to stand out, and they just didn't. Not to mention all these awful transformations. Like, if you look at Innocent Zero, his design looks like something a 10-year-old thought of. There's also way too many characters introduced in this series to the point where no character gets enough time to develop. When it comes to the rest of the artwork, the series is very middle of the road. Don't get me wrong, it has its moments, but they're few and far in between. And while I could say that individual panels looked good, I could not really name a fight which I think looked impressive. The fights are quite messy, the combat doesn't have a great flow, and it's mostly about these big flashy effects. It's nothing egregious, but it still doesn't help this series' case. And this is where things get really bad. The amount of cliches stuffed into this is borderline unbearable. Characters showing up last minute to save their friends, villains saying I'm using X% of my power, the same character backstories that we've seen a million times before, the same shonen speech that every protagonist gives about his friends and how much he values them, and one-sided pummelings that the villains inflict onto our protagonist and others, only for them to come back. The further into this series you get, the worse it really gets, past the Innocent Zero introduction. When it comes to the characters, these fights, it pushes really hard to try to be a battle shonen, but it doesn't do anything right. The characters are lacking both in personality and design. Their abilities are pretty boring. Just everything about the series feels so generic. The manga doesn't really try to do anything differently, and while it's pretty content with being a clone of other series, and I don't mind that, the problem is that it doesn't do any of these things well. It's basically an inferior version of every series that it tries to imitate. You could say that this is Mashal just parodying other series, but one, it's not even trying to be funny in these moments, and two, it's not just referencing these works, it's blatantly taking a lot of core ideas behind these manga and making them into its own main storyline. Some of these are more okay than others. Like, I don't think it was that bad that they kind of had the same structure as One Punch Man, or they used some ideas from Harry Potter. But then when you look at stuff like Full Metal Alchemist, where the last arc was basically the same plotline as FMA's, except done a lot worse, where you have these six guys and their father, and they end up going at the same gate too. And obviously, this is a reference to that series, but it's just done in a way which is just cloning it in a worse way. And then you have stuff like Bonkais from Bleach, which I don't know why they included that. Then transformations from like series like Yu Yu Hakusho and Dragon Ball, and obviously the very obvious Dragon Ball references with the weights on Mashal's hands, which that one I thought was pretty bad, and the spirit bomb at the end. It just like, why? These moments weren't funny, nor did they add anything to Mashal. So unless this was just him just being a fanboy, I don't see the purpose behind any of this narratively. This could have just been a really awful attempt at comedy, but that still doesn't really make it any better. I wish this series tried to be more unique. If you want to draw fan art, just draw fan art. Past that, there's the ability system, which is quite a turnoff as well. There's no real rhyme or reason as to why someone want to fight, other than them just having more magic power or just having better predetermined abilities. It makes fights super predictable and bland. On top of that, the power dynamics were already pretty off with Mash having really no threat to him throughout the entire series. I never really thought he was going to lose a fight, which just kills all your excitement for the fights. People somehow put up a better fight against Mash at the start of the series when compared to the end of the series. In One Punch Man, this isn't much of an issue because obviously the main goal of that series is comedy, but in this series you're expected to take it seriously quite a large portion of the time, which I definitely think could have been reduced. I don't know why they decided to get all serious on you just out of nowhere. It feels wishy-washy, and it does the action portion of things a lot worse than the comedy, so if it just stuck to comedy, it probably would have been a lot better. Villains are also really awful in this series. Not only are they design-wise not very interesting, also personality-wise, they're all just insane. And not like a cool kind of insane, they're mostly just completely illogical. A lot of their personalities are very similar to one another. Characters will switch sides once they're defeated, another very common shonen trope, and it's done super poorly here. Basically, one word from Mash after they're defeated is enough to convince them, hey, this guy's a great dude, and I'm gonna put away all my insane tendencies, which are just completely gone now for some reason. The final fight too, it really had very little to offer. It was a pretty awful final fight, sadly. The Doom fight was better, but I think the final panel of the Innocent Zero fight was at least good, and after that it kind of ended things on a high note. It definitely could have been shorter, but hey, at least it wraps things up pretty nicely. There are times when this series can be funny, and sometimes there is good artwork, but the vast majority of the time, it's just very much below average. I'm feeling a light 4. Thank you everyone for watching. Like and subscribe. Leave a comment. Anything to do with manga. I think I'm going to try to upload every Sunday from now on. We'll see how good that goes. But yeah, every Sunday, maybe I'll try to do a few additional in between if I can get more than one a week. I'll see you.